Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. In my view, most people, even atheists, believe in a God, some sort of God. And the Quran, by the way, seems to confirm this. For example, in Surah Al-Kafirun, which is called the Surah of the Disbelievers, it says, "Say, O you who deny the truth, I do not worship that which you worship, neither do you worship that which I worship. And I will not worship that which you have ever worshipped, and neither will you ever worship that which I worship." So basically, the implication here is that everybody worships, even the disbelievers. But who is it that they worship? Now, why should there be a God or higher power? Because most people, most rational people, see a universe and creation, which they did not create. They see laws and order, which they do not control or did not put in place. And they see non-physical things, like consciousness, free choice, morality, meanings, subjective things, innate knowledge, math, and so on, things that cannot be proven materialistically. So how they need an explanation for such things, and they cannot really be explained in the absence of a higher power. Because according to the Quran, the qualities of Rabb, which means Lord in English, the entity, the higher power responsible for creation, for governance of this universe, and for ownership, are clearly evident for everybody, including the disbelievers at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the problem of the disbelievers at that time was not in the necessity for a creator and an owner for this universe, but in the requirement to worship that creator, to consider him as an ilah, which means object of worship, because that entails following, praying to, and obeying. And that's what they did not want to do. And in the Quran, it highlights in 39:38, it says, "If you ask them who created heavens and earth, they will say God." So if everybody believes in a sort of higher power, what is the issue? Why do we have people divided into groups according to faith? In my view, the issue is that some reject the concept of accountability, of judgment, of the afterlife. Because belief in the true God, the one God, it opens up the door to an obligation towards this God. And this may interfere with personal desires. Somebody who makes his own desires his deity. He worships his whims. He follows his desires. This is what guides him. This is what he obeys all the time. So it is a kind of self-worship. So people are split into different groups with respect to accountability and their belief in an afterlife. So a believer, he submits to the fact that he is accountable, and he lives his or her life according to the manual, the revelation from God. Others refuse accountability. They seek different creative ways to escape it. And how do they do that? They have to invoke other sources or other gods that do not interfere with their desires. We're built to worship something. And also the evidence around us indicates there's a higher power. But the God that is introduced in Revelation does not appeal to most of us or some of us who refuse accountability. So people invent their own gods. So some, for example, the less scientifically inclined, they create physical idols from stones or wood or whatever and worship these idols. This is very convenient, of course, because an idol, a dumb idol, has no demands, so no accountability. Some people, they can't let go of the idea of God completely. So what do? They change their religion. They remove accountability by introducing the concept of sacrifice and salvation. So if somebody, a prophet or somebody dies for our sins, we are no longer accountable. We still have the freedom to follow our desires and know that we are saved. Others get away from accountability by inventing an upper cap on the punishment or an upper limit on their accountability. So, for example, in the Quran it says that some of the people of the book say that we will only be punished for a few days. So that also frees them from responsibility because, whatever we do, there's an upper limit, there's an upper cap. Another group of people who are more scientifically inclined, such as today's atheists, they understand that there's clear evidence for design in this universe, for fine-tuning. There's encrypted language in our DNA and in our experience. Language does not come without intelligence. There's intent in the design. There's complex systems, irreducible complexity, which cannot be broken down into parts. There are interrelated laws and so on. These cannot be explained randomly or materialistically. So what do these people do? They resort to a more subtle form of deception. So they grant God-like creative powers to processes and laws without any evidence, because they want to grant some legitimacy to their delusions. So they call God by other names: Mother Nature, forces of the universe, natural selection. They give these, they created these names, but they give these names creative powers. Just to give an example of how they speak about nature, as if they're speaking about God. So Frank Lloyd writes, he says, "I believe in God, only I call it nature." Steven Weinberg, a famous, he's a Nobel Prize winner, he's an atheist. He says, "The laws of nature allow for the existence of beings who can observe it. And life would be impossible if any one of the physical quantities had slightly different values." Even Hawking, he said, "Because there is such a thing as the law of gravity, the universe can create itself from nothing." And he says, "Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing." By the way, notice how he inadvertently commits a slip of the tongue. He still calls it creation. In a contradicting statement in his A Brief History of Time, he writes, "If we discover a complete theory, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason. Then we would know the mind of God. We should know the mind of God." Anyway, these are just some quotes to give you a flavor of how they deify these man-made names such as nature, laws, and forces, and etc. Such a deception, the assignment of creative powers to processes and laws, this really conveniently avoids addressing the emergence of the universe. It avoids the problem of the complexity in design, the laws, the existence of non-physical things, and it avoids the stigma of faith. And more importantly, it leaves somebody, a man, the intelligent human being, non-accountable to these deified, dumb, inanimate processes. And again, we go back to worshiping our desires and worshiping ourselves. And God tells us that the only one worthy of worship is the one who creates, who guides everything to its function, who knows everything, who hears everything, who sees everything, who grants and takes away life and sustenance. A God to whom we will be called to account and by whom we will be judged. And none of these man-created idols can do that. And if you see the Quran, it says, it criticizes these gods that people create for themselves. They have taken, in 25:3, they have taken gods that can create nothing, and they are themselves created. So if you can't create, why are you a god? Furthermore, the Quran criticizes the ungodlike qualities of these intermediaries or these pseudo-gods that people create. So it says, if they can't intercede for me, if they cannot deliver me from the wrath of God and the judgment, what value are they? It also says that a God that does not communicate with his creatures, that's not a God. Regardless of which God substitute people have chosen, they're all irrational. Why? Well, for one, it makes no sense to worship something that does not want to be worshipped, nor does it deserve to be worshipped. It makes no sense to worship when we have nothing to gain from such worship, because we're worshiping things that are more helpless than we are. Also, regardless of the elaborate names that people assign to these pseudo-gods like natural selection, Mother Nature, forces of the universe, whatever, the fact remains that you cannot give what you don't have. How can non-physical mathematical equations create a physical universe? How can rationality and consciousness come from non-rational, unconscious processes? How can intelligence come from dumb chemicals? How can our vision and our hearing come from blind and deaf biological material? Why don't these self-sacrificing, blind, dumb, non-rational, unconscious names or processes start by giving themselves these qualities, sight and vision and intelligence, instead of giving them out to us? What's ironic is that according to the Quran, mankind or man himself chose to take the trust, to take the responsibility. And this is apparent in Surah Al-Ahzab, that the heavens and earth and the mountains all were offered the responsibility. Some scholars say this is choice, some say this is a trust, some say this is the accountability. And they all declined except man. Man said, I'll take it on. So we chose it, but now we want to turn our back on it. We want the responsibility, but with no accountability. So a final word on accountability. We can believe that we are insignificant, randomly produced chemical scum, which is what Hawking thought, and that we live a purposeless life with no consequence for our actions. Or we can believe that we are God's honored vice regents on earth to construct this earth, with the universe subjected for our benefit, and that we are responsible and accountable for our actions. So we can believe also that this universe is eternal, and that the human experience or appearance is only a temporary, fleeting appearance. Or we can believe that this universe has a beginning and an end, but that we are eternal in the afterlife. So we are free to believe what we want. God tells us there is no coercion in religion. But remember that it is mainly with accountability and responsibility that we humans rise above the hedonistic primitive tendencies. That's how we distinguish ourselves from the rest of God's creation. And that gives meaning to our humanity.